Welcome to this deep dive. It's going to be about, well, something that I think is pretty relevant to just about everything, how to deal with obstacles and kind of figure out how to move forward even when things are really, really tough. And we're going to be looking at this through a lot of really cool stuff, actually. We're going to be looking at ancient philosophy and modern psychology. And we'll even look at some historical anecdotes and some inspiring biographies, too.
Yeah, I think what's really fascinating about all these different sources is how they kind of show these unexpected connections between figures from like completely different times and backgrounds.
Yeah.
Like we're going to see how a Stoic idea from like centuries ago is actually being used in business strategies today, or how a US president's leadership style was like totally shaped by some really personal struggles.
So, okay, let's unpack this whole obstacles as opportunities concept. I mean, at first, it does sound kind of counterintuitive,
Right.
but it's actually one of the core ideas of Stoicism, which is this, ancient philosophy that we're going to be kind of diving into here. The basic idea is that obstacles are like you can't avoid them. They're a part of life,
Right.
but they can also be the path to progress.
Yeah, it really makes you rethink how you see obstacles.
Yeah.
Like, we usually think of them as setbacks or roadblocks, but the Stoics are kind of like, hey, what if we saw them as chances to grow and learn?
Yeah. And there's actually a great story that shows this perfectly. Have you heard of Michel de Montaigne, the
Mhm.
French nobleman and essayist?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So back in 1569, he had this near-death experience falling off a horse. And he actually watched as, like, it felt like his life was slipping away,
Oh,
only to have it, like, come rushing back at the last second.
it's wild how an experience like that can totally shift your perspective.
Yeah.
For Montaigne, it was like a wake-up call. Like,
Mm.
it just catapulted him into this life of meaning and purpose.
Right.
Before that, he was kind of just drifting. But afterwards, he became like one of the most prolific and insightful writers of his time. I mean, he published essays, served as mayor, traveled as a diplomat. Like,
Ah.
it was a really remarkable life. And it all started because of this close call with death.
Yeah, it really makes you wonder, like, what could we all achieve if we all had that kind of, aha moment, like
Yeah.
that sudden understanding of how precious and full of potential life really
That's
is.
what's so cool about Stoicism. It gives us ways to develop that awareness without having to go through something super traumatic.
Okay, yeah.
And one of those is this practice called premeditatio malorum, which basically means premeditation of evils.
So it's not about like being a pessimist or just thinking about negative stuff all the time.
Oh, no, not at all. It's more like a mental fire drill for life.
Okay.
So the idea that you mentally rehearse like potential setbacks so that if they happen, you're more prepared.
Okay.
This could be anything from picturing how you deal with losing your job
Yeah.
to preparing for a tough conversation.
Yeah. Oh, okay. It sounds a lot like that pre-mortem technique they use in businesses these days where like a team will imagine their project failed and then work backward to figure out what could have gone wrong.
Exactly. And that's a perfect example of how an ancient Stoic idea is being used in a modern setting. By thinking about potential problems in advance, teams can sometimes avoid them altogether, or at least lessen their impact.
So the takeaway here isn't that we should just walk around expecting the worst, right?
Right. The real point of premeditatio malorum is to help you manage your expectations. Life is full of surprises, and things don't always work out the way we want them to. But by acknowledging that and kind of getting ready for setbacks, we can become more resilient when those inevitable bumps in the road do show up. We're less likely to freak out or give up when things get rough.
It's almost like we're building this reserve of mental and emotional strength, like an athlete training for a competition.
That's a great analogy. The Stoics actually believed this mental training was just as important as physical training, and they were big on developing what they called the discipline of will.
So it's not just about taking action, but about having that inner strength to endure and adapt to whatever life throws at you.
Precisely. And one of the most inspiring examples of this is Abraham Lincoln. Most people know him as this iconic figure who led the U.S. through the Civil War. But what many don't know is that he struggled with really serious depression throughout his life.
It's not a side of him you hear much about. It's hard to imagine that someone who achieved so much would also be dealing with such intense internal struggles.
That's why his story is so powerful. Those personal battles played a huge part in shaping his leadership. He developed this incredible resilience from dealing with his own internal turmoil. And that resilience is what equipped him to face the enormous challenges of leading a nation divided by war.
I'm curious, how did that resilience actually play out in his leadership?
Think about the qualities he's remembered for: patience, compassion, and this unwavering focus on a cause that was bigger than himself. These were all qualities that were forged in the fire of his personal struggles. It's like those challenges became the crucible where his leadership was tempered and refined.
I've always loved that saying people attribute to Lincoln, "This too shall pass." It's a simple phrase, but it just gets to the heart of Stoic philosophy, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It speaks to the Stoic belief that both happiness and sadness, success and failure, they're all temporary. In a world that constantly tells us we can control everything, the Stoics remind us that acceptance is key. Some things are just beyond our control.
Yeah, and realizing that can actually be incredibly freeing. If we learn to accept the things we can't change, we free up so much energy to focus on what we can influence.
That's the key. Acceptance isn't about being passive or giving up. It's about being smarter with your energy, focusing on what you can actually change instead of wasting time on what you can't.
So, how do we build this discipline of will, this inner strength that Lincoln had? The Stoics use this interesting metaphor of an inner citadel to describe the mental and emotional strength we need to face external challenges. What exactly is this inner citadel supposed to represent?
It's like a metaphor for the strength we build within ourselves. It's a fortress of resilience that can withstand whatever life throws at us. The Stoics believe that this strength isn't something you're born with. It's something you have to work at, both physically and mentally.
And that's where their famous saying, mens sana in corpore sano, comes in, right? A sound mind in a sound body. They understood that physical and mental well-being are connected, that taking care of our bodies is essential to developing mental resilience.
Exactly. We see this in Theodore Roosevelt, who had really bad asthma as a kid and overcame it through intense physical training. That training gave him the foundation to embrace what he called the strenuous life, tackling challenges head on and never backing down.
And it's important to remember that Roosevelt wasn't just some outdoorsy guy. He was a governor, a president, a writer. He approached intellectual challenges with the same energy he brought to his physical pursuits. He really did seem to embody this inner citadel, a source of strength that helped him handle anything life threw at him. And it's interesting how that idea of an inner citadel, it's not just for individuals, right? I mean, think about the Jewish community throughout history, facing all kinds of persecution and hardship, but still managing to hold on to their faith and traditions. I mean, it wasn't physical strength that helped them survive. It was more like, this incredible strength of spirit.
Yeah, it really shows you the power that comes from having a sense of purpose and meaning.
Yeah.
It's like they carried this inner temple with them that gave them strength and comfort wherever they went. And that's something we can all try to build within ourselves, I think.
Yeah. So we've talked about accepting what we can't control, but what about when we actually need to, push through, like persevere even when we face setbacks over and over again? There's this other Stoic idea that I find really fascinating, and it's called acquiescence. It's about, not just accepting what happens, but embracing it, even the stuff we don't like, and actually using it to our advantage.
Yeah, the Stoics even had a term for this: Amor Fati. It means love of fate. And it's not just about accepting what happens, it's about actively embracing it, finding the good in even the toughest situations. And a great example of this is Thomas Jefferson. I mean, he had a speech impediment, but he still became one of the most brilliant writers in American history.
It's like by embracing that limitation, he was able to channel his energy into a different way of expressing himself, and it ended up having a huge impact on the world.
Exactly. Limitations can sometimes lead us down paths we never expected and help us discover strengths we didn't even know we had. And we see something similar with Thomas Edison. Most people know him for his inventions, but they might not know that he was almost completely deaf.
And instead of seeing that as a disadvantage, he actually embraced it. It might have even helped him focus and concentrate so intensely.
And his reaction to that fire that destroyed his factory in 1914, that's even more amazing. It was a huge loss. I mean, financially, and years of research gone. But instead of freaking out, Edison just said, well, we've just gotten rid of a lot of junk. He saw it as a chance to start fresh, and within weeks, his factory was partially back up and running.
That's Amor Fati in action, right? Taking a devastating loss and turning it into fuel for the next chapter.
Absolutely. And it reminds me of another person who faced incredible challenges with grace and resilience, the boxer Jack Johnson. He dealt with so much racism and hatred, but he always remained calm and in control. It was almost superhuman. Even during his famous fight against Jim Jeffries, he was taunted and people used dirty tricks against him. But he just kept smiling and used his opponent's anger against him.
It's like both Edison and Johnson understood that they had a choice in how they reacted. They could have easily gotten angry or bitter or given up on everything, but they chose a different path, a path of resilience and even joy.
And their stories raise an important question. What is it that gives us strength when times are tough? The Stoics believed that finding something bigger than ourselves, a cause or a purpose that goes beyond just our own needs, can be an incredible source of resilience.
So it's not just about gritting your teeth and pushing through. It's about finding a deeper kind of strength that comes from connecting with something larger than yourself.
Exactly. For Stockdale, it was his fellow prisoners.
Mm.
For Lincoln, it was about preserving the Union.
Mm.
And for each of us, it might be something different. Our families, our communities, a belief system, a creative pursuit, or even just trying to make the world a little bit better in some small way.
So it's about finding that thing that makes the struggle worth it, that thing that gives us the strength to keep going even when we want to quit.
And what's fascinating is that when we focus on helping others, our own problems often feel lighter. When we shift our attention away from our own suffering and toward the needs of others, we tap into a different kind of strength, a strength that comes from connection and purpose.
All right, so we've covered a lot here. We talked about seeing obstacles as opportunities, building a discipline of will, creating an inner citadel, embracing Amor Fati, and finding strength in something bigger than ourselves. It's a lot to digest.
It is, but it all points to one essential idea.
Mhm.
We have more control than we think. We can't always control what happens to us, but we can control how we see it, how we respond to it, and how we decide to move forward.
So it's not about avoiding obstacles or pretending they don't exist. It's about understanding that they're a part of life and finding ways to navigate them with grace, resilience, and even a sense of purpose. But how do we actually do that? Where do we even start?
Well, one of the most powerful tools the Stoics gave us for building this perspective and resilience might surprise you. It's contemplating our own mortality.
Contemplating our own mortality. Huh? That sounds kind of, I don't know, intense. Isn't that supposed to be like depressing?
Yeah, it might seem that way at first, but the Stoics weren't saying we should, obsess over death or dwell on all this morbid stuff. It was more about understanding that our time here is limited and using that knowledge to really live in the present moment.
So it's another way of changing our perspective, kind of like how we talked about reframing obstacles as opportunities.
Exactly. And a great example of this is, again, Michel de Montaigne. Remember that near-death experience he had when he fell off his horse? That experience totally changed how he thought about death. He wasn't afraid of it anymore. He saw it as a natural part of life, something to think about and even embrace.
I love that he didn't turn into some, hermit after that. He actually wrote with a lot of wit and humor, almost like facing his mortality, made him appreciate the absurdity and beauty of life even more.
It just goes to show you that acknowledging our mortality doesn't have to be all doom and gloom. It could actually be freeing. Think about that old Roman saying,
Yeah.
memento mori, remember that you will die. But not in a scary way, more like a reminder that each day is precious and that you shouldn't waste time on things that don't matter.
So by accepting that we're all going to die someday, we can actually stop procrastinating, stop being afraid to take risks, and start living with more purpose and urgency.
Exactly. It's like having a deadline, but the deadline is life itself. It can be a really powerful motivator to make the most of the time we have.
It's cool how all these Stoic principles kind of connect and build on each other. It's not just about accepting what we can't control, but using that acceptance to create a life that's more meaningful and fulfilling.
That's what's so great about Stoicism. It gives you this whole approach to life, a set of principles that work together to help you deal with life's challenges with more wisdom and resilience.
And one of those challenges, like we've seen in all these stories, is that life isn't just a one-time obstacle course.
Right.
It's more like a marathon with mountains behind mountains. You get over one obstacle and there's another one waiting for you.
Yeah, the Stoics knew this.
Yeah.
They knew that overcoming one obstacle doesn't mean you'll never face another one. It just means you're ready for the next challenge and the one after that and the one after that.
Yeah.
It's an ongoing process of growth and adaptation.
It makes me think of Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor and Stoic philosopher. Late in his reign, he had to deal with this huge crisis. His most trusted general, Avidius Cassius, started a rebellion and declared himself emperor. I mean, you'd think most rulers in that situation would be furious and want revenge. But Marcus Aurelius, being a Stoic, he took a different approach.
He didn't get angry or try to get even. Instead, he decided to forgive Cassius. He wanted to show the world that there was a better way to handle even the worst conflicts. He basically wanted to turn this betrayal into a chance to demonstrate the power of virtue and forgiveness.
Wow, that's incredible. That's Stoicism in action.
Unfortunately, Cassius was killed before Marcus Aurelius could actually carry out his plan. But he still used the whole situation to show his principles. He refused to punish Cassius's supporters, pardoned the people involved in the plot, and asked the Senate to keep his rule free of bloodshed. He basically turned this whole mess into a lesson in how to turn an obstacle into a path towards a more just and compassionate world.
So even when he was betrayed and faced a rebellion, Marcus Aurelius found a way to embody those Stoic principles of acceptance, forgiveness, and resilience. It's a powerful reminder that we always have a choice in how we respond to the challenges we face in life.
And that, I think, is the biggest lesson the Stoics have to offer. It's not that life will be easy or without problems, but that we have the power to choose how we deal with those problems.
hmm
And in making those choices, we find our true freedom, our true strength, and our true potential.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what are we left with? What's the one thing you really hope people take away from all of this?
I hope it's a sense of optimism and possibility. The understanding that even though obstacles are a part of life, they don't have to control us. We can choose to see them as chances to learn and grow and to use them to create a life that's both meaningful and fulfilling.
We can choose to be like the people we talked about today. Montaigne, Lincoln Roosevelt, Stockdale, Marcus Aurelius, and so many others. They faced tough times with courage, grace, and determination. And they not only overcame their own challenges, but they inspired others to do the same. And each of us has the power to do that too.
So as you go about your week, keep these examples in mind. Remember the ideas we've discussed? And the next time you face an obstacle, no matter how big or small, remember this. The obstacle is the way.